The October sun cast its pale gold over the glass towers of the city, a deceptive warmth against the sharp wind that swept down from the Hudson. Chloe pulled her second-hand wool coat tighter, though the collar was already frayed, the button chipped from years of use. She stood before the 35-story skyscraper that housed Martin Holdings, the place she had fought for months to enter through rejection letters and sleepless nights, through balancing temp jobs, with long evenings nursing her mother's frailty. Everything about this moment should have felt triumphant, and yet as the reflection of the building stretched endlessly upward, it seemed to mock her, reminding her how small she was in a city built for giants. The glass doors sighed open when she pushed them, swallowing her into a world she had only seen in glossy magazines. The marble floor gleamed beneath a chandelier that spilled light across suits more expensive than her yearly rent. Receptionists with immaculate posture tapped into tablets, as if their fingers conducted symphonies. Chloe's heels, borrowed from her cousin, and half a size too small, clicked nervously against the polished floor. She felt every eye glide over her, not in cruelty, but in the subtle acknowledgement of someone who did not belong. She approached the line of elevators, her pulse quickening. To her left, a row of chrome doors with standard buttons humming with activity as employees pressed up down floor numbers. To her right, a solitary elevator, black mirrored, no panel, no numbers. Its doors stood like a secret, lit by a faint blue strip across the seam. She told herself it was for executives, only the kind of forbidden space that screamed, "Do not enter." She turned toward the regular elevators, ready to disappear into her anonymity. That was when the mirrored doors whispered open. There was no one inside. No badge swipe, no footsteps leaving, just the eerie chime of invitation. She hesitated. In another life, she might have ignored it. But this morning, after months of scraping by, after praying for something more than survival, her feet betrayed her. Just this once, she whispered under her breath, stepping inside. The doors sealed shut behind her, locking her into silence, scented faintly of cedarwood and citrus. Not the sterile air of public elevators, but the carefully curated fragrance of power. Her heart thundered as her eyes darted across the panel. There were no buttons, only a single glowing word on a small screen penthouse. Her stomach dropped. She reached for the seam of the door, as if she could pry it open, but it was too late. The floor vibrated, carrying her upward into the unknown. In that instant, Chloe's mind spiraled into every possible disaster. Security dragging her out before her badge even activated, termination for trespassing on her first day, the humiliation of explaining to her mother that she had already lost the job she had prayed for. She pressed her trembling palms against her skirt, steadying her breath as numbers ticked silently in her head, 20, 30, 35, until the chime returned. When the doors slid open, the world fractured. A man stood at the threshold tall enough that the light from the vast windows behind him framed him like a silhouette from some cruel dream. His suit was midnight navy, tailored with surgical precision, his white shirt collar sharp against the line of his jaw. The glint of a platinum watch caught at his cuff, understated, yet commanding. But it was not the suit or the watch that arrested her breath. It was his eyes. Icy, calculating blue, as if carved from the glass skyline itself. They fixed on her with a quiet force that stripped away excuses, explanations, even dignity. For one suspended heartbeat, the city vanished. Chloe's voice cracked like glass. "I'm so sorry." "I didn't mean to." "You took the executive elevator." His words were smooth, velvety, but cold, the way whiskey burns without warmth. She swallowed. "I didn't know." The doors just opened. He tilted his head, studying her, as though she were a puzzle, misplaced on his chessboard. Amusement flickered, or maybe disdain. And you thought it wise to step inside anyway? Chloe straightened her shoulders, pride bristling even as panic gnawed her insides. It's my first day. I was trying to get to my department. His gaze sharpened, unreadable. Then, almost lazily, he turned away. A woman in stilettos and a scarlet skirt hurried forward, breathless. Mr. Martin, you're 9 o'clock. Postpone it. He cut in his tone, so even it sliced sharper than anger. And tell HR I want Chloe Nelson's full file on my desk. Immediately. Chloe froze. Mr. Martin. Henry Martin. The Henry Martin. CEO of Martin Holdings, youngest billionaire in New York. The man who built an empire out of Wall Street, deals before 35, and vanished from tabloids as ruthlessly as he conquered them. And she, Chloe Nelson girl, from Harlem, with a mother in dialysis and rent hanging by a thread, had walked straight into his elevator, like an uninvited guest at Olympus. The assistant's eyes flicked over her with something between envy and pity. You're braver than you look. I didn't mean, no one means to, she interrupted, smirking. But no one ever gets out of that elevator without consequences. Except you. Chloe's pulse stuttered. What do you mean? Let's just say, the woman murmured, lips curving. You caught his attention. And that is never easy to do. It was only the beginning. In the war room of HR 2 floors below, the request from the top turned into action. Within half an hour, Chloe's entire life transcripts, references, temp jobs, even the emergency contact scrawled with her mother's name, was bound into a leather folder on Henry Martin's desk. He hadn't opened it yet. He stared at the name embossed in gold, the syllables lingering like a song he didn't remember but couldn't forget. Chloe Nelson. She hadn't worn designer heels. Her blazer had a seam fraying at the shoulder. He noticed details others missed. And yet when she stood in his elevator, wide-eyed, but unbroken, nervous but oddly dignified, something had snagged at him. He despised loose threads. Henry leaned back in his chair, the skyline burning white behind him. His assistant hovered at the door. Do you want me to follow up with HR? No, he said quietly. That will be all. When the office was silent again, he opened the folder. 28. Graduate of a state university. No finance background. Letters of recommendation that read like small hymns. One supervisor had written relentlessly, positive, impossible, not to mistrust. Another had scribbled in ink, if I could have kept her, I would have. His eyes lingered on the emergency contact line. Renee Nelson, adoptive mother. Adoptive. A sound stirred in Henry's chest, low and unwelcome. A memory of being a boy who once had no last name, no father, only a fire that took more than it left. He closed the folder with a snap, pressing it flat against the wood. Coincidences were for the weak. He did not believe in fate. And yet. Down on the 17th floor, Chloe finally found her cubicle, small-cornered, barely enough for a desk. But to her, it was a throne. She forced her hands busy color-coding spreadsheets, arranging files, replying to emails. Anything to smother the image of the man whose presence felt less like a person, more like an empire with eyes. At noon, her monitor blinked with a memo. Ms. Nelson, report to the CEO's office. 48th floor, 12:15 p.m. Her stomach plummeted. Not even a full workday. She was going to be fired. She caught her reflection in the dark screen eyes, 2 wide lips pressed into a line. She smoothed her curls into a bun, whispered a prayer, and rose. The 48th floor felt like a different planet, silent, humming with power. every surface glass and steel. Assistants moved like ghosts in tailored suits. "Mr. Martin, we'll see you now, one," murmured her tone, reverent. Chloe stepped inside his office. She half expected to be dismissed on sight. But Henry was not at his desk. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York stretched like a kingdom, at his feet. "Sit," he said without turning. She obeyed, perching on the edge of the chair. He finally turned. His eyes cut through her. "Do you know why you're here?" She swallowed. "The elevator. I want to apologize again. It won't. It's not about that." Her breath faltered. "It's not. You're being reassigned." Her heart jolted. Reassigned, Henry walked to his desk, sat across from her, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "Effective immediately, you will serve as my executive secretary. The position includes a salary increase, non-disclosure clauses, and the expectation of availability beyond standard hours." Chloe blinked. "I don't understand. Why me?" He hesitated just long enough to sting. She thought she glimpsed something real. Then it was gone. "Because I need someone who won't ask questions. Someone loyal, capable, invisible when necessary." Invisible. The word landed like a stone. Her spine straightened. "And if I refuse?" Henry leaned closer. His gaze did not flinch. "Then you'll be released. With severance." Quietly. The silence tightened between them. Chloe felt her pulse in her throat. He wasn't offering. He was testing. And yet something in her rebelled. "Then I suppose," she said softly, surprising even herself, "I'll have to prove you wrong." For the first time, Henry's mouth curved, not a smile, but the ghost of one sharp and dangerous. "We'll see." When she left his office, the city outside was washed in afternoon gold. The same elevator awaited, her mirrored waiting. This time, when its doors opened, Chloe stepped inside, not like a mistake, but like someone who might one day belong. And high above, behind glass and power, Henry Martin found himself staring at a single name, embossed on leather, a name he should have forgotten the moment she stepped into his world. But he didn't, and that unsettled him more than anything had in years. The first morning, as Henry Martin's secretary arrived with a weight Chloe Nelson could feel in her bones, though no one else in the building would have seen it. To them, she was another young woman, in a pressed blouse and pencil skirt, walking with purpose across the 17th floor. To her, every step echoed with the reminder that she no longer belonged to the anonymity of the lower ranks. She had been pulled upward, tethered to a man whose presence shifted rooms before he even entered them, and she couldn't tell yet if it was a promotion or a sentence. Her desk had been relocated overnight. Where once she had sat among cubicles that buzzed with chatter, her new space now rested in a glass annex just outside the fortress of Henry's office on the 48th floor. The desk was sleek, a minimalist arrangement of metal and pale oak. A phone that blinked constantly. A laptop linked to schedules she didn't yet understand. A window with a view of the city that felt more like a temptation than a gift. Across the transparent wall, she could see the silhouette of Henry himself, a figure of stillness that never slouched, never faltered, the kind of posture that suggested he belonged to a different species altogether. Chloe slid into her chair, fingers brushing across the polished surface as though she were trespassing. She adjusted the hem of her skirt and forced herself to breathe evenly. She had promised herself that she would not crumble no matter how impossible this assignment seemed. If Henry wanted someone invisible, then she would give him something better: presence, without arrogance, competence, without fear. It was the only armor she had. The phone lit up within minutes, a call redirected from Henry's private line. She answered with a steady tone she didn't feel. Mr. Martin's office. The voice on the other end rattled names and times, demanding confirmations. She scribbled notes, learning as she went, praying she wouldn't misstep. Before the call ended, Henry's assistant, Eleanor, appeared at her side with a stack of folders. Board reports. "He'll want them tabbed and cross-referenced by noon," she said briskly, her tone betraying neither hostility nor warmth. Chloe accepted the stack with both hands, nodding. Of course. The hours blurred into a rhythm she hadn't known she could manage. Calls, notes, calendars, shifting with a flicker, documents to organize. It was overwhelming, but her mind clung to the work with relief. Better to drown in responsibility than think too much about the man a wall away. Still, she felt him. Even without seeing his face, his presence was threaded through every call, every decision, every line of ink she touched. It was nearly noon when the intercom buzzed. His voice came low, precise, wrapped in that bourbon-smooth edge that had already begun to haunt her. "Ms. Nelson, my office." Chloe rose, palm's damp heart lurching against her ribs. She smoothed the line of her skirt and stepped inside. Henry was standing by his desk, sleeves rolled back just enough to reveal the lines of his forearms, a detail she hated herself for noticing. His eyes lifted to her, immediately cool and assessing. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit." She obeyed, fighting the urge to clasp her hands together, like a child in front of a headmaster. "You've managed the morning well enough," he said without preamble. "But I'll warn you, this is not a position where mistakes are forgiven. Not by me, and not by the people waiting for me to falter." Chloe met his gaze, steady, even though her chest burned. "I understand." "Do you?" His eyes narrowed slightly as if testing her resolve. "You don't come from this world, Ms. Nelson. One wrong detail, a call missed, a meeting double booked, and the headlines write themselves. They want me unstable. And now, with you in my orbit, they'll have more questions than ever." The words cut, not because of cruelty, but because they were true. She felt the weight of what he was saying. She was already a liability, simply by being here. She drew in a slow breath. "Then I'll just have to give them nothing to use." Something flickered across his face, something between surprise and a reluctant trace of approval. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "We'll see if you can hold to that." The conversation shifted, but the undercurrent remained. He handed her a document. "Tonight is the annual Martin Holdings Gala. You'll attend. As my wife." Chloe's breath caught. "I thought no one else will believe the arrangement unless you are seen by my side. This is your first test." His tone brooked no negotiation. "You'll receive the proper attire. My staff will prepare you." Her pulse hammered in her ears. A gala. Cameras. The elite of New York watching her, dissecting her, judging why Henry Martin had chosen a woman like her. She swallowed hard. "And what happens if I fail this test?" His gaze locked on hers, unwavering. "You won't." The words should have sounded like faith, but they were an order. She rose, clutching the file against her chest. As she turned to leave, Henry spoke again, softer this time. "One more thing, Ms. Nelson." She stopped. "Never apologize for being where I put you. If anyone has a problem, they bring it to me. Not you." The statement jolted through her like static. Not protection exactly, but something dangerous, and close to it. She nodded once, then escaped back into the safety of her annex breath, shuddering in her throat. The afternoon unfolded like a storm held in glass. Eleanor delivered a garment bag from a designer Chloe had only ever seen in fashion magazines. When she unzipped it, in the private dressing room, her reflection startled her. The dress was midnight silk, cut to her curves with elegance that made her look like someone she had never met. The mirror reflected not the girl, who had grown up balancing grocery bags on crowded subway cars, but a woman who might stand at the side of Henry Martin and not look out of place. Still, Chloe's nerves gnawed at her. She could already hear the whispers that would follow. She wasn't born into this world of chandeliers and wine glasses that cost more than her rent. And yet, as the hour approached, she told herself what she had told Henry earlier: give them nothing to use. The gala was held at a historic ballroom downtown, its chandeliers dripping with gold, its corridors lined with velvet. Chloe descended the staircase at Henry's side, his hand lightly guiding the small of her back. Every head turned. Conversations stilled, champagne glasses paused mid-air. The room's silence was deafening. She forced a smile, measured soft, practiced in the mirror minutes before. Her arm looped through his steady, despite the tremor she felt beneath her skin. Henry's presence at her side was ironclad, a shield that looked like ownership to others, but felt like an anchor to her. Introductions came like bullets. Senators, heiresses, investors, women dripping in diamonds who smiled too sharply, men with handshakes that lingered too long. Some greeted her as Mrs. Martin, with the politeness of people masking disbelief. Others allowed their curiosity to shine their eyes, questioning what hold this woman could possibly have over Henry. When one French socialite leaned in too close and whispered, "Where did he find you?" Chloe's heart nearly collapsed in her chest. But before she could respond, Henry's arm tightened at her waist. His voice dropped low, lethal. "Chloe runs circles around most people in this room, present company included." The woman recoiled, lips pressing thin. Henry moved on, without another glance, but Chloe's pulse raced at the words. It was the first time he had defended her in public, the first time he had said her name as if it belonged in that world. Later, near the edge of the ballroom, she found her breath again. She turned to him, voice low. "You didn't have to defend me." He kept his gaze forward. "I didn't. You called me smart. You don't even know me." His eyes shifted to hers, then sharp and unreadable. "That's where you're wrong. I notice what others ignore. You see details, you act quietly. You've rebuilt yourself more than once. That's not invisible, Chloe. That's strength." The words struck deeper than she wanted them to. She looked away before her face betrayed too much. The night dragged on with its polished rituals, but Chloe's thoughts spun long after. By the time the gala ended and Henry escorted her back to the penthouse, the city lights below blurred into a sea of gold. She stepped into the mirrored elevator once more, no longer the intruder she had been that morning, but not yet someone who belonged. As the doors closed, she caught Henry's reflection beside her, tall, unshaken, impossibly composed. Yet when the light flickered across his profile, she wondered if somewhere behind those storm-blue eyes, he too was beginning to feel the weight of a story neither of them had meant to start. And that possibility, fragile, forbidden, frightening, was more dangerous than anything else she had faced that day. The storm began quietly, disguised as whispers in hallways and messages between screens. Chloe Nelson felt it before she saw it, the shift in the air, when she entered the building on Monday morning, the way conversations dimmed just a fraction too soon. The previous night's gala had splashed her image across social media feeds and gossip sites before dawn. The mystery wife of Wall Street's Ice King. The phrase repeated like a curse. She didn't need to look at the headlines to know how they sounded. The photos told enough of the story: a black woman in a midnight silk gown, standing beside Henry Martin, the billionaire who never smiled. They called her beautiful in one breath, a scandal in the next. When the elevator doors opened on the 48th floor, the silence wrapped around her. She kept her chin high even as her pulse trembled beneath her skin. Eleanor, Henry's assistant, glanced up from her tablet expression, unreadable. "Mr. Martin wants you in his office." Of course he did. He always did. Inside, the light was softer than usual. Morning sun spilling through the glass walls. Henry stood by the window, his jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up. The skyline burned behind him like a living flame. He didn't turn immediately when she entered. Instead, he spoke to his reflection in the glass. "You've seen the headlines, I assume." Chloe's voice came quieter than she meant. It was hard not to. He turned then, and she caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Fatigue, or maybe fury carefully leashed. "You handled yourself well last night. That's not what I expected from someone new to this world." She hesitated. "You sound surprised." "I am." Most people drown the first time they're thrown into deep water. Maybe that's because they've never had to swim before. His gaze lingered on her for a moment too long, as if searching for something he couldn't name. Then he broke the silence. "The board will be watching us now. Every move, every word. You'll need to be careful." "I always am." He studied her face, unreadable. "No, you survive. There's a difference." The words struck deep. She wanted to tell him he didn't know her, that he had no right to read her that way, but something in his tone, almost regretful, silenced her. Instead, she said softly, "I don't plan to be anyone's weakness, Mr. Martin." His eyes darkened. "Good, because mine have destroyed better people than you." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed sharp against the quiet. He answered curtly, his voice turning cold, all business. "Yes, tell them to hold the line." "No, I don't care what the Whitmore Group demands. They can take their offer elsewhere." He ended the call without another word and looked at her again, the shift in his expression so swift it almost startled her. "You can go, Ms. Nelson. You've got a full day ahead." But as she turned toward the door, he added quietly, "Ignore what they say about you." Their opinions were bought long before you walked into that ballroom. The rest of the morning crawled forward in waves of scrutiny. Chloe could feel the glances from the other assistants, curiosity sharpened with jealousy. Every time her name echoed through the internal chat system, she imagined the invisible threads of gossip weaving tighter. Still, she focused on her work, scheduling meetings, proofreading reports, building a wall of precision between herself and the noise. It was the only power she had. By late afternoon, her eyes ached from the glow of her screen. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples when a shadow fell across her desk. Vivian Carter stood there, Henry's former assistant, and the woman whose perfume still faintly haunted his office. She was elegance, sculpted in red lipstick and expensive perfume, her smile the kind that never reached her eyes. "I've heard congratulations are in order," Vivian said, her tone sugar-coated steel. "You've risen quickly, haven't you?" Chloe kept her voice even. "I'm just doing my job." "Of course." Vivian tilted her head, examining her like a rare insect. "Funny thing about this company. It rewards the ones who learn to play the game. But the game doesn't forgive amateurs." "Then it's good I'm not playing." Vivian's smile widened, sharp as glass. "Oh, darling, whether you know it or not, you're already on the board." She lingered a moment longer before walking away, her heels slicing through the silence. Chloe sat still long after she was gone, the words burning in her chest. That evening, as the city bled into twilight, Henry called her into his office again. He was alone, jacket draped over the chair, tie loosened. The skyline reflected in his window like molten gold. He looked different then, not untouchable, but human in a way that unsettled her. "Vivian stopped by," he said, without looking up. "So you know. I always know." He closed the file in his hands and leaned back. "She's not subtle. She's loyal to Whitmore now. They'll use her to try to undermine me. Chloe frowned. Why tell me this? Because they'll come for you too. They'll dig into your past, your family, anything that smells like weakness. If they can't touch me, they'll touch what's near me. Then maybe you should have chosen someone else. He met her gaze, steady, relentless. I didn't choose wrong. Her breath hitched. She didn't want to ask what he meant, but part of her needed to. Why me, Henry? The use of his first name slipped out before she could stop it. Something flickered behind his eyes, the briefest crack in the armor. Because when you looked at me in that elevator, you weren't afraid. She almost laughed. I was terrified. He shook his head. No, you were angry. It's different. Fear bends people. Anger reminds them they're still alive. The quiet that followed was heavy electric. The city lights spilled across the floor like liquid gold. Chloe looked away. First, pulse quickening. If you think anger makes me strong, you've never seen me break. I've seen enough to know you won't stay broken. For a moment, the air felt too thin. She turned to leave, needing distance, but his voice stopped her. Chloe. She froze. He rarely said her name like that, soft, almost reverent. You don't have to prove yourself to them. Not to anyone. Just to me. Her throat tightened. And what happens if I fail your test? Henry's gaze held hers, slow and deliberate. Then I'll fail with you. It was the closest thing to vulnerability she'd ever heard from him, and that frightened her more than his power ever had. The days that followed were an exercise in survival. The company buzzed with speculation. Her inbox overflowed with requests thinly disguised as gossip hunts. Eleanor tried to shield her where she could, but there were limits. The Whitmore Group was escalating its corporate battle, and Chloe was suddenly at the center of a storm she hadn't asked for. Every article that mentioned Henry now mentioned her. The unknown woman behind the empire. A charity case turned Cinderella. Some headlines were crueler. On Thursday, a package arrived at her desk. No name, just a silver envelope. Inside was a photograph grainy taken from a distance of her and Henry leaving the gala together, his hand at her waist. On the back, scrawled in pen, "You don't belong in his world. You'll destroy him." Her stomach twisted. She didn't tell Henry. Not yet. She folded the photo and slipped it into her drawer. That evening, as she prepared to leave, she found him still at his desk, shirt sleeves rolled up, tie discarded. The world outside had dissolved into night. She hesitated in the doorway. "You should go home," she said softly. He looked up, half a smile ghosting across his lips. "You sound like you think I have one." The sadness beneath his tone was so brief, she might have imagined it. She crossed the room, setting the last of his reports on the desk. "You built a company and empire. That's more home than most people ever get." His eyes lifted to hers. "And yet you still think I look lost." She wanted to deny it, but couldn't. Sometimes. Something in him stilled. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the desk, his gaze burning through the space between them. "Tell me something, Chloe. When you walked into that elevator on your first day, did you really think it was an accident?" The question caught her off guard. Of course it was. He studied her face, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his mouth. "Maybe. Or maybe I left the door open." Her heart stumbled. "Why would you do that?" "Because sometimes," he said quietly, "the universe hands you a mirror when you need one. And you—" He paused, eyes glinting in the dim light. "You see things in me no one else dares to." She didn't know what to say. Words would only break the fragile silence between them. The air felt charged, unsteady. He rose from his chair, and suddenly he was too close, close enough for her to catch the faint trace of cedar and bourbon, close enough that her breath tangled with his. "I should go." she whispered. Yes, he said. But neither of them moved. The city roared beyond the glass horns and sirens, and 1,000 lives colliding. Inside, the quiet of his office time held its breath. When she finally turned to leave, his voice followed her, soft, almost broken. Be careful, Chloe. The higher you rise, the more the ground wants you back. She didn't look back, but the words stayed with her, long after the elevator doors closed. In the mirrored reflection, she caught her own eyes and barely recognized the woman staring back. She was no longer invisible, and that, she realized, was the most dangerous thing of all. Rain fell over Manhattan, as if the sky itself had decided to mourn. The streets glistened beneath the city's restless heartbeat, headlights slicing through the mist. From the 48th floor of Martin Holdings, Chloe Nelson watched droplets race each other down the glass, each one carrying the reflection of a world she was still learning to survive in. It was Friday. 5 days since the gala, 4 since the whispers began, and barely 2 since the anonymous photograph landed on her desk. She hadn't told Henry. She had promised herself she wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. But that promise had begun to crumble under the weight of eyes that followed her everywhere she went. That morning, as she entered the lobby, a new silence had greeted her. It wasn't curiosity this time. It was judgment. Phones angled subtly in her direction, flashes of light caught in polished marble. Something had shifted again. She knew before she saw the headlines. Leaked emails expose CEO's secret affair. Beneath it, her name, her face, and a screenshot of what looked like messages, intimate, scandalous, and entirely fabricated. The blood drained from her hands. Her breath refused to obey. The elevator ride up was a blur of static. She didn't see faces, only reflections, her own expression paling against the mirrored walls. By the time the doors opened, the floor outside Henry's office felt colder than usual. The air too thin. Eleanor met her halfway, voice clipped. He wants you inside. Now. Henry's office was a war zone of silence. The blinds were half-drawn shadows, slicing across his desk. He stood near the center sleeves, rolled back, his phone in one hand, and a printed copy of the article in the other. His eyes, when they lifted, were not cold this time. They were dangerous. Sit. He said, his tone low, unsteady. She obeyed. The chair felt miles away from his desk. Tell me, he began, how exactly these messages appeared on a journalist's desk before dawn. I don't know, she whispered. I didn't. He threw the paper onto the table. It slid across the glass, stopping inches from her. They have timestamps, details about meetings, locations, private conversations. Someone inside this building leaked them. Then find them, she said softly, because it wasn't me. His gaze burned into her, the weight of a man torn between reason and rage. You're asking me to believe you. I'm asking you to remember who gave you no reason not to. The words hung there, suspended between pride and pain. For a moment, something in his expression faltered. Then he turned away, exhaling sharply. Vivian's behind this, he muttered. Or Whitmore. They've been probing my security for weeks. Chloe rose slowly. Then why are you looking at me as if I'm one of them? Henry faced her fully, now eyes raw, unguarded. Because I've learned that the people closest to me are the ones who ruin me the fastest. It was a confession and an accusation all at once. Chloe's voice trembled, but not from fear. Then maybe the problem isn't proximity, Henry. Maybe it's trust. He stared at her, and in that silence, something between them cracked open, a fissure neither of them knew how to close. Before she could say another word, Eleanor burst through the door, pale and breathless. Sir, The board's called an emergency meeting. They're demanding you step down until an internal review clears your name. Henry's jaw tightened. Of course they are. Eleanor hesitated, eyes flicking toward Chloe. They're also asking that she be suspended immediately. The room froze. Chloe's throat closed around the words she couldn't say. Henry's hand flexed against the desk veins rising under his skin. That won't happen, Eleanor began, but he cut her off, voice like a blade. I said no. The door clicked shut behind her. The silence that followed pulsed with everything unsaid. You just made yourself their target, Chloe whispered. I already was. He looked at her again, softer now, the fury gone, replaced by something quieter, heavier. They can smear my name all they want, but they don't get to destroy you. Her chest ached. And what if protecting me destroys you? He smiled then, a tired, fractured thing that didn't belong on a face like his. Then at least it would be my choice. That night the storm outside deepened. Thunder rolled over the skyline, shaking the glass. Chloe worked late alone, refusing to go home. It felt safer surrounded by chaos than silence. She was gathering files when the lights flickered, then steadied again. A sound startled her, soft, deliberate footsteps behind her. She turned, heart in her throat. Vivian stood there. The woman's red lipstick glowed against the dim light, her smile cutting cleanly through the dark. Long night. Chloe straightened, forcing calm. What are you doing here? Oh, I could ask you the same. Vivian walked closer, heels clicking. But I suppose when your boyfriend's empire is collapsing, you don't exactly have the luxury of rest. He's not my... Please. Vivian's laugh was low and venomous. Everyone knows now. The poor girl from Harlem who caught the billionaire's pity. You're his weakness, Chloe. And in this world, weakness gets monetized. Chloe met her gaze steady. If this is your doing, you've just made yourself a weapon for men who'll never see you as anything else. Vivian's smile didn't waver. You really don't get it, do you? I'm not here for their approval. I'm here for what I deserve. The company was mine before you stepped off the subway. He took everything from me, my position, my loyalty, my future. Now I'm taking something back. And what is that? His peace. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating her face for a heartbeat. Beautiful. Furious, broken. Chloe saw in that flash, not a villain, but a wound that had chosen revenge over healing. When the elevator doors closed behind Vivian, Chloe sank into her chair, hands trembling. The photo in her drawer, the emails, the whispers, it all fit now. Vivian was the ghost in the machine feeding the press, twisting truth into poison. At nearly midnight, Henry returned. His hair was damp from the rain, his shirt clinging slightly at the collar. The exhaustion in his eyes was sharper than anger. You should have gone home. She rose slowly. I needed to understand what we're up against. His gaze softened. And what did you find? That the war isn't out there. It's inside your own walls. He closed the distance between them until the space between breaths disappeared. You're not supposed to fight my battles. She looked up at him, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. Maybe I'm not, but I refuse to stand by while they destroy what you built. He studied her for a long moment, rain trailing down the glass behind him like a heartbeat. Then he reached for her hand, hesitant, deliberate. His touch was warm, grounding, far too human for the man the world called untouchable. I don't know what this is, he said quietly, almost to himself. But it's the first thing in years that doesn't feel transactional. Her throat tightened. Then don't ruin it by turning me into your shield. He smiled faintly, a flicker of something that might have been hope. You think you could stop me? I'd have to try. Outside, thunder broke the world apart. Inside, his hand still lingered against hers, their reflections blurred by rain. For a heartbeat, the weight of everything, the lies, the press, the war waiting beyond the walls, ceased to exist. There was only the echo of breath, the fragile safety of that single touch. When he finally let go, the warmth stayed with her. Hours later, Chloe walked out of the building, the rain now soft as silk against her skin. The city smelled like electricity and fear. Somewhere behind her, Vivian's shadow still lingered, and above, in one of those countless windows, Henry's light burned through the storm. She didn't know if tomorrow would bring ruin or redemption. But for the first time, she no longer felt like a pawn in someone else's story. She was something else now, something the world wasn't ready for. And as thunder rolled over Manhattan again, Chloe Nelson decided that whatever war was coming, she wouldn't be the one to lose. The boardroom of Martin Holdings was not built for warmth. It was a place of glass and precision, where voices echoed without echoing back, where every gesture had a weight, and every silence a consequence. That morning, the skyline beyond the windows gleamed under pale winter light, mocking the tension inside. Henry sat at the head of the long marble table. Shoulders squared, fingers steepled, as if holding himself together by will alone. Around him, 12 board members, old money in expensive suits, watched him like predators, circling something they thought was already bleeding. The meeting had begun under the guise of protocol, but everyone in that room knew it was an execution. Mr. Martin began. Charles Whitmore, his uncle's smooth baritone cutting through the air. I trust you've read the proposal. We believe a temporary suspension of your authority is in the company's best interest until the ongoing investigation concludes. Henry's eyes didn't waver. You mean the witch hunt you helped orchestrate? Charles smiled faintly. He had the kind of smile that belonged to men who'd never lost anything they couldn't buy back. Let's not use inflammatory language. This is business, nephew. The press is tearing us apart. Investors are panicking and He paused, eyes flicking toward the document before him. Personal decisions are now a matter of public ridicule. Henry leaned back in his chair, the picture of composure, though a muscle ticked in his jaw. You mean Chloe? A murmur spread like static. Yes, Charles said smoothly. The woman you've chosen to entangle in corporate scandal. You've compromised not only your own reputation, but that of Martin Holdings. That's not leadership, Henry. That's recklessness. Henry's voice dropped to a controlled calm that somehow made the room colder. Do not speak her name like she's a mistake. Then what is she? Charles pressed. Your assistant, your lover, your liability. The press calls her all three. The shareholders are losing patience, and quite frankly, so am I. Henry rose slowly. The scrape of his chair against the marble floor sounded like a warning. This company was built on risk. My father taught me that, your brother taught me that. What he didn't teach me was cowardice. Careful, Charles said, though his smile didn't fade. You're standing in a room full of people who can vote you out. Then let them. Henry's gaze swept the table. If you think this company survives without me, by all means try. But understand this. You're not just firing a man. You're dismantling everything that still makes this place worth something. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Charles spoke again, his tone deceptively mild. You've changed, Henry. There was a time you'd have sacrificed anything to protect this legacy. Now you're risking it all for a woman who walked into your life by accident. Henry's stare hardened. Some accidents are the only honest things that ever happened to us. The meeting adjourned with no decision, only threats wrapped in politeness. As Henry left the room, the weight of stairs followed him, like a storm that refused to break. Outside, Eleanor waited by the elevator tablet in hand, eyes filled with quiet concern. "They're going to vote next week," she said softly. "Charles has 3 more seats already pledged." "I know. Should I brief legal?" "Not yet," he murmured. "I want to see what he does when he thinks I've gone quiet." Eleanor hesitated, then added, "Chloe's been getting calls. Reporters mostly. One of them found her mother's address." Henry froze mid-step. "What? It's getting dangerous, Henry. You can't protect her if this continues." He looked up at the mirrored wall of the elevator, his reflection staring back, controlled, immaculate, but fractured beneath the surface. "Then I'll give them something else to talk about." That evening, Chloe returned to her apartment in Harlem, the one she'd refused to leave even after moving closer to headquarters. The neighborhood was loud, alive, and unafraid of itself. But tonight, the air was different. The lights of the hallway flickered. The door to her unit was slightly ajar. Her pulse spiked. She stepped inside slowly, every muscle alert. Nothing looked stolen, but everything felt touched. A photograph on the counter, her and her mother taken years ago, was turned face down. Her old laptop sat open, the screen still glowing faintly. On it, an email draft blinked. The sender's field read, "To press@dailyledger.com." The subject line was short, "The truth about Henry Martin." Chloe's stomach twisted. She reached for the trackpad, her hand trembling. The cursor moved on its own, controlled remotely. Before she could shut it, the screen went black. Her phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number. "You don't belong in his world. Leave before it devours you." She exhaled shakily, fighting the instinct to cry. Then she grabbed her coat and left. By the time she reached Henry's penthouse, rain had begun to fall again, sharp and cold. Eleanor let her in with a brief nod before disappearing down the hall. Henry stood near the window, tie loosened drink in hand. He didn't turn when she entered. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should that email in my apartment," she replied. His head snapped toward her. "What?" "Someone broke in. They were trying to send something to the press. From my account." He set the glass down slowly. "Did they take anything?" "No. But they left a message." She hesitated, then met his gaze. "They know about my mother." His expression shifted from anger to something darker, heavier. "Then it's Whitmore," he said finally. "He's digging below the belt now. And what happens when he finds what he's looking for? He won't. Henry, he already has." Her voice cracked despite her best effort. "They're painting me as some woman who clawed her way into your life for money. They're not just attacking you. They're erasing me." He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hand lifting as if to touch her face, but stopping just short. "Then let me erase them first." She shook her head. "That's what they want. For you to lose control." He stepped back, pacing. "Control is all I have left." "Then maybe that's the problem," she said quietly. "You're fighting everyone else's war, but the one that matters. What war is that? The one where you stop protecting me like an investment and start trusting me like a person." The words landed like a slap, not cruel, but clean. Henry turned away, his breath visible against the cold window. "If I let you in completely, Chloe, there's no taking it back." "Then don't," she said softly. "Just stop shutting me out." He looked at her then, and something inside him broke open, soundless but real. "You're infuriating," he whispered. "So I've been told." He laughed under his breath, the sound brittle and short-lived. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a folder, and handed it to her. "This is what they don't want you to see." She opened it. Inside were contracts, emails, and signatures, proof that Charles had been funneling money through offshore accounts, under the guise of consulting fees. "This could destroy him," she said. "That's the point. But if you release it, it takes the whole board with him. You'll burn the company to the ground." He met her eyes. "Maybe that's what it takes to start over." She stared at him for a long moment. "And what happens to us if you do?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between them already had. 2 days later, the news broke. Insider corruption rocks. Martin Holdings' family feud at the helm. Charles Whitmore was exposed. His accounts frozen, his reputation shredded. The board scrambled to distance itself from him, and suddenly the vultures turned on each other. Henry should have felt vindicated. Instead, all he felt was exhaustion. He found Chloe that night in the penthouse library, sitting cross-legged on the couch, papers scattered around her like fallen leaves. She was reading one of the articles, her expression unreadable. "They're calling you ruthless," she said softly. "I've been called worse." "And me?" He hesitated. "Untouchable." She smiled faintly. "That's new." He sat beside her, the distance between them no more than a breath. "You were never the liability they thought you were. I was never your salvation either." His voice dropped to a whisper. "No, you were my reminder that I still had one." She turned to him, then eyes dark and searching. "So what now?" He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Now we stop surviving and start living." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The city outside pulsed like a heartbeat neon, and noise and promise. Then quietly he reached for her hand. No grand gesture, no words, just contact, warm, human enough. In that fragile stillness, with the storm retreating over Manhattan, the war wasn't over, but for the first time they weren't fighting alone. And though Chloe didn't say it aloud, she knew the next battle wouldn't come from outside anymore. It would come from within the space where fear, desire, and trust finally collided. That was where the real test would begin. The snow arrived without warning, quiet, steady, unapologetic. By dawn, Manhattan had softened beneath it, the edges of the city blurring into something almost gentle. From the top floor of Martin Holdings, the skyline shimmered like glass dust, untouched by the chaos that still simmered below. Henry stood near the window of his office, a porcelain cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. His reflection stared back, composed, deliberate, the kind of man who seemed immune to the world. But Chloe knew better. She could see the cracks no one else could. She entered without knocking. He'd stopped asking her to wait outside weeks ago. "You didn't sleep," she said quietly, setting a folder on his desk. Again. Henry didn't turn. "You can tell that from the doorway. I can tell it from the way you breathe," she replied. "You hold it too long, like you're afraid something might escape." He gave a soft exhale, more sigh than laugh. "And what exactly am I afraid of?" "Ms. Nelson." She hesitated before answering. "Not being in control." That earned her a glance sharp, but not unkind. "Control is the only thing standing between me and collapse." Maybe, she said, moving closer, "but it's also what keeps you from feeling alive." The words hung in the air, fragile but daring. She didn't look away, and for a moment, neither did he. The tension between them had become a living thing, quiet, patient, coiled somewhere beneath civility. He turned back to the window, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. "There was a time when I thought survival and living were the same thing," he murmured. "You've made it complicated." "I'll take that as a compliment," she said softly. It wasn't one, but she saw the flicker of a smile before he could hide it. The city below was beginning to move again, cautious under the snow. Life resumed, though not for them. For the first time in years, Henry hadn't shown up at the morning board briefing. The scandal was cooling. The investors were settling, but the rumors lingered like smoke, persistent, insidious. Chloe's name still trended online every few days, paired with headlines that twisted their story into fiction. The CEO's charity case. The woman who cost a fortune. Love or leverage. She stopped reading them long ago. But Henry hadn't. He read every one cataloging their cruelty, like evidence in a case he couldn't win. When she left the office that afternoon, the snow had deepened. She stopped at a small cafe on Lexington, ordered 2 coffees, and returned to the building. Henry's office was dark when she entered, lit only by the faint glow of the city beyond. He was still there. No coat, no tie, just him and the skyline. "I brought this," she said, holding out the cup. He looked at it, then at her. "You're learning my routine." "Maybe I'm trying to rewrite it," she said. He took the cup, fingers brushing hers. The contact was brief, but it felt heavier than it should. He looked at her, something uncertain, stirring in his expression. "You shouldn't keep doing that." "What?" "Making me forget where the lines are." She tilted her head slightly. "Maybe that's where the problem begins, your obsession with drawing them." He studied her, his voice quiet, but laced with a rough honesty. "I've built my life on boundaries. You keep walking through them, like they were never there." "Then maybe they never should have been," she said. He said nothing, but when she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Chloe." She turned. "Dinner. Tomorrow. My place." She blinked. "Is that an order?" "It's an invitation." Her lips curved. "I'll think about it." She didn't. The next night she was standing at the door of his penthouse. Snow still clung to her coat, her curls damp from the cold. Henry opened the door himself. No staff, no guards, just him in a gray sweater, sleeves rolled up barefoot. The domesticity of it almost startled her. "I didn't know billionaires cooked," she teased lightly. He gestured toward the kitchen. "They do when they don't want witnesses." Inside, the air smelled like garlic and thyme. A record played softly in the background, Billie Holiday, the kind of voice that filled the silence without demanding attention. The table was set with quiet precision. No crystal, no silver, just 2 plates and a bottle of red wine. "This feels normal," she said as she took her seat. "Don't get used to it," he replied. "I'm terrible at pretending to be ordinary." They ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something unspoken in the air, something that didn't need to be explained. When he finally spoke again, it was without his usual armor. "I was 16 when I learned that love was a transaction," he said quietly. "My mother married for wealth, my father for power. Everything after that was negotiation, until you." Chloe set her fork down, her pulse catching. "You're saying I'm not a transaction. I'm saying you're the first thing I can't quantify," he replied, meeting her eyes. "And that terrifies me." She leaned back, watching him carefully. "Maybe you should stop trying to measure everything that makes you human." He smiled faintly, but his gaze didn't waver. "And what about you? What do you measure love by?" She hesitated, then said softly, "By how much it lets you breathe, not how much it suffocates you." Silence settled again, deeper now, almost fragile. He poured more wine, his movements deliberate, and when their fingers brushed again, neither pulled away. The air seemed to hum. Hours passed without either noticing. They spoke of nothing and everything: her mother's recovery, his father's legacy, their mutual fear of what came next. When she rose to leave, he followed her to the door. "Thank you," he said. "For dinner, for staying." She looked up at him, eyes reflecting the city's lights. You make it sound like I had a choice. You always do. He reached for the door, but before she could step out, she turned. Henry. Yes. If this ever stops being about survival, promise me you won't run from it. He held her gaze for a long moment. I can't promise I won't, but I can promise I'll regret it if I do. The door closed softly behind her. The days that followed carried an unfamiliar calm. The board's fury had quieted, investors were returning, and the press had found new scandals to devour. But peace, Chloe learned, was never permanent in Henry Martin's world. It began with a phone call, a journalist polite but insistent, asking for comment about a rumor. Something about offshore accounts, forged documents, a transfer under her name. Her stomach dropped. She hung up before hearing more. When she reached Henry's office, he was already on the phone, his voice low and dangerous. I don't care what they think, they have shut it down before it reaches the ledger. He ended the call, jaw tight. They're saying you embezzled funds, he said flatly. She froze. What? They've traced a transaction to your name. $500,000 into an account in the Caymans. Her mind spun. That's impossible. I know, he said, but the evidence looks clean. Someone's trying to use you to get to me. She took a step back, her breath sharp. And you believe me? His eyes softened, but only slightly. I want to. That's not an answer. He hesitated. It's the only honest one I have. Something inside her cracked. You're so terrified of being betrayed that you can't even recognize loyalty when it's bleeding in front of you. Chloe, no. Her voice trembled, but held. You can't build trust by analyzing it, Henry. You either choose it or you don't. He didn't stop her when she turned for the door. He didn't follow. The click of her heels against the marble echoed long after she was gone. That night she packed her things from the small office adjoining his and left her ID badge on his desk. She didn't write a note. She didn't look back. For 3 days, Henry didn't sleep. The building felt hollow, without her every corridor too quiet. He found himself standing in front of her empty desk, more than once, staring at the chair as though expecting it to breathe. Eleanor found him there, once, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. You should talk to her, she said softly. She doesn't want to hear from me. Maybe not. But you owe her the chance to decide that for herself. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. That evening, snow began to fall again, soft, relentless. He found her in a small bookstore on Bleecker Street, her coat draped over the back of a chair, a cup of tea cooling beside her. She looked up when he entered, eyes wary but calm. How did you find me? She asked. I never stopped looking, he said simply. She sighed, closing her book. If you're here to apologize, don't. I'm not, he said. I'm here to tell you I was wrong. That sounds like an apology. He stepped closer, his voice quiet but steady. I thought love was supposed to make sense, that if I could control it, I could survive it. But you, he paused, searching for the right words. You're the first thing that's ever made chaos feel like home. Her breath caught. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city outside hummed with its endless rhythm, unaware that something fragile was rebuilding inside that tiny bookstore. She rose slowly. And what do we do now? He smiled faintly. Maybe we stop surviving and start living. She hesitated, then reached for his hand. The snow outside thickened, muting the city's noise. Inside, beneath the low hum of warmth and silence, two people finally stopped running from each other, from the ghosts of control, from the idea that love had to be perfect to be real. And somewhere between the falling snow and the quiet, They began again, not as CEO and secretary, not as savior and survivor, but as two people who had finally learned the simplest truth sometimes. Love doesn't fix you. It just stays long enough for you to learn how to breathe. The first light of morning spilled through the window of Henry's brownstone, painting the room in pale gold. For the first time in years, the silence around him didn't feel hollow. Chloe was still asleep, her head resting against the curve of his shoulder, her breath slow and steady. Her presence grounded him in a way he hadn't known he needed. It was strange how peace could terrify a man more than war. He lay there listening to her breathing, wondering when exactly his life had become unrecognizable. The ruthless man who once calculated love like an equation had somehow fallen for the one woman who refused to be a variable in it. When Chloe stirred her hand, brushed his chest, and he felt the faint tremor of awareness run through him. She blinked, lashes fluttering, her voice still laced with sleep. "You're awake early," she murmured. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Too quiet for you," she teased gently. "Too real," he said. She smiled against his skin. "You'll get used to it." But as much as he wanted to, Henry knew that quiet never lasted long in his world. Later that morning, while Chloe made coffee in the small kitchen, Henry checked his phone for the first time in hours. The flood of messages wasn't unexpected calls from the board, requests from investors, and one unread email with a subject line that made his pulse quicken. Urgent media request. NBC Prime interview confirmed. He frowned. They had been avoiding interviews since the scandal cleared, preferring to let silence rebuild their image. He hadn't approved this one. "Everything all right?" Chloe asked from the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Someone just decided to make us news again." She arched a brow. "Us. An exclusive. NBC. Tonight." Her expression didn't change, but her grip on the mug tightened slightly. "They want us to tell our story." "They want a spectacle," he said, setting the phone down. "A love story people can consume. Redemption sells. And what do you want?" she asked quietly. He looked at her for a long moment. "You," he said simply. She smiled faintly, but her eyes held something deeper, a question he couldn't quite read. By evening, the city was dressed in twilight. The studio was colder than it looked on television, the lights too bright, the air too rehearsed. Henry sat beside Chloe on the velvet couch, his hand loosely resting on his knee. Across from them, the host, a woman with eyes sharp enough to cut through any lie, smiled with the practiced ease of someone who'd seen 1,000 love stories and believed none. "Mr. Martin, Ms. Nelson," she began warmly, "you've been called everything from a scandal to a modern fairy tale. Tell us, where does the truth lie?" Chloe's lips curved in a controlled smile. "Somewhere in between, I think." The host leaned forward. "The world saw your relationship start as a contract. How do you respond to people who still think it's a performance?" Henry answered before Chloe could. "Performances end," he said evenly. "We're still here." A ripple of silence moved through the set. The host's smile tightened. "That's a beautiful sentiment. But surely it wasn't easy turning something transactional into something real." "No," Chloe said softly. "It wasn't easy. But real things never are." The interview went on questions about trust, about forgiveness, about the cost of loving someone who lived under a microscope. Chloe spoke with measured honesty, her calmness disarming. Henry, for once, didn't hide behind precision. He spoke not as a CEO, defending a decision, but as a man acknowledging the mess of being human. When the host asked what changed him, Henry looked at Chloe and said, "She did." The words weren't dramatic. They were quiet, almost simple, but the sincerity in them filled the room. For a moment, the cameras didn't exist. The audience didn't matter. It was just them, two people who had been through fire and somehow still found warmth in each other. When the interview ended, applause followed, soft, genuine. But outside, the storm was already brewing. The headlines hit before they even left the studio. Henry Martin admits love changed him. Stock prices dip overnight. Board divided on CEO's public sentiment. Martin Holdings loses investors amid emotional exposure. By the time they reached the car, Henry's phone was buzzing uncontrollably. He ignored it, eyes fixed on the city lights flashing past the window. "You knew this would happen," Chloe said quietly beside him. "Yes," he replied. "I just didn't care." "Maybe you should," she said softly. "They'll use it against you." He turned to her. "Let them. They've taken everything they can already." "Not everything," she murmured. "Not yet." Her words lingered like a warning. The next morning brought chaos. Eleanor stormed into Henry's office with a stack of reports and a face pale with urgency. "They're calling an emergency board session. Charles may have lost his seat, but he still has influence. They're saying you're unstable, too emotionally compromised to lead." Henry's expression was unreadable. "Let them vote." "Henry, this isn't a game." He looked up, eyes steady. "It never was." When she left, Chloe appeared in the doorway, watching him quietly. He didn't speak. Neither did she. She just crossed the room, took the papers from his hand, and placed them aside. "If they want to see you fall apart," she said softly, "don't give them the satisfaction." He gave a low, humorless laugh. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she said, "but it's necessary." That evening he attended the board meeting, not as a man defending his position, but as someone who had already decided what mattered most. The room was full of wary faces, half of them calculating the rest, pretending not to. Charles wasn't there, but his allies were. One of them, a man named Bennett, spoke first. "Henry, this isn't personal. We just believe your recent public behavior reflects a lack of professional restraint." Henry's voice was calm. "You mean love?" A murmur spread. "Call it what you want," Bennett said stiffly. "The shareholders don't invest in feelings." "Maybe that's the problem," Henry replied. "You've built an empire on profit, and you've forgotten what it means to have purpose. This is a corporation, not a romance," another member snapped. "And yet," Henry said softly, "love built this too. My father loved this company enough to bleed for it. My mother loved her image enough to destroy herself for it. I've loved it enough to save it and lose myself in the process. So if you think I'm unfit because I finally remember I'm human, then by all means, replace me. But understand this, machines don't inspire loyalty. People do." Silence followed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, one by one, a few heads began to nod. The vote was taken an hour later. The verdict: Henry Martin would remain CEO. When he stepped out of the boardroom, the hallway seemed brighter. Chloe was waiting, her arms crossed, her eyes full of something that looked dangerously close to pride. "How bad?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Bad enough to matter. Good enough to survive." She exhaled. "You did it." He shook his head. "We did." For the first time, he reached for her hand in public, in full view of everyone. There was no hesitation this time, no calculation, just a choice. Days passed, and the noise began to fade. The city, relentless as always, moved on. But something inside Henry had changed permanently. He started coming home earlier, leaving his phone untouched through dinner. Some nights Chloe would wake to find him working quietly beside her, not on spreadsheets or forecasts, but sketches, drawings of the future he wanted to build. Not for the company, for them. It was a future that didn't involve control, only presence. Yet peace, as always, had a fragile shelf life. It came one morning unexpected and cruel, in the form of a headline, "From Harlem to heiress Chloe Nelson's hidden past unearthed." Beneath it, photographs her mother's old apartment, her hospital bills, her scholarship records. It wasn't scandalous, just invasive, brutally so. She read it in silence. Henry read it beside her. "They're trying to humiliate me," she said quietly. "They're trying to hurt me," he corrected. "And they think you're the way to do it." She looked at him, voice steady, despite the tremor in it. "Then, don't fight back. Not this time. You expect me to let them. I expect you to let me speak." That afternoon, she posted a single message on her long-dormant social account. A photo of her mother's hands, resting in her own captioned, "Before the diamonds, there were nights I prayed for rent. Before the penthouse, there was a one-room apartment with a leaking roof. I am not ashamed of who I was. I'm proud of who I've become." Within hours, the post went viral. Not because it was polished, but because it was real. By evening, the tide had shifted. Headlines changed. Public sentiment turned. The woman the world called unworthy had spoken, and the world listened. Henry found her on the balcony that night, the city lights reflecting off her skin like fireflies. He stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You realize, you just won a war without raising your voice." She leaned back against him. "Maybe love's not about fighting louder. Maybe it's about standing still long enough for the truth to catch up." He kissed her temple, the gesture soft, reverent. "You make it sound simple." "It never is," she said. "But it's worth it." The wind picked up, carrying the hum of the city with it. Below them, New York pulsed, restless, unending, alive. Above, two people stood on the edge of everything they'd almost lost, finally beginning to understand that survival wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something neither of them had planned for, but both were finally brave enough to keep. Spring came quietly to New York, as if the city itself had decided to exhale. The snow melted from the rooftops, revealing glass and steel beneath, and Central Park began to bloom again, the trees whispering with the first signs of green. Life resumed its rhythm. But for Henry and Chloe, the world had changed shape entirely. The storms that once defined them had finally begun to fade, leaving behind something quieter, deeper, and far more dangerous: peace. It had been 6 months since the chaos. 6 months since the last article, the last whisper, the last boardroom fight. Martin Holdings had survived stronger and cleaner than before, but Henry no longer defined himself by balance sheets or quarterly reports. He had learned something far rarer, that strength wasn't about control. It was about surrender, the kind that didn't weaken, but healed. Chloe still worked beside him, though the title of assistant had long since faded into something symbolic. She managed projects now, initiatives under her own name, foundations, dedicated to supporting women from underprivileged backgrounds, scholarships in her mother's honor, partnerships with organizations she once could only dream of joining. And yet every morning she still stopped by his office, first coffee in one hand, a teasing smile in the other. "Mr. Martin," she said one morning, leaning against the doorframe, "you do realize your 9 a.m. has been waiting since 8:45. Henry looked up from his desk, pretending not to smile. "You mean the man who used to own half of Boston's tech sector? He can wait." She raised an eyebrow. "You say that about everyone these days." "That's because everyone these days is less interesting than you," he said smoothly, and her laugh filled the room in a way that still undid him. The truth was, the empire no longer owned him. He still ran it, but differently. His meetings ended on time. His days no longer bled into nights. There was room now for living, for breathing, for her. But peace never came without ghosts. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, Henry still woke with the echoes of his past. The boardrooms, the betrayals, the years of isolation disguised as discipline. Chloe never asked about those nights. She simply reached for him, grounding him with the gentlest of touches. One night, as rain traced slow patterns across their bedroom window, she stirred beside him. "You're awake again," she murmured. He hesitated, then whispered, "I keep thinking about everything we almost lost." She turned to face him, eyes half closed, but soft. "You didn't lose it. You just had to learn how to stop fighting it." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You make it sound so easy." It wasn't. But it's over now. He wanted to believe that, and most days he did. Weeks passed in gentle rhythm. The foundation launched its first national campaign, and Chloe stood before hundreds in a sunlit auditorium, her voice steady and certain as she spoke of resilience, of hope, of the fine line between survival and transformation. Henry watched from the crowd, pride swelling in his chest. She was radiant, not because of the lights or the applause, but because she was finally standing fully in her own story, unshadowed by his. Afterward, she found him waiting backstage, leaning against the doorway. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she said, smiling. "I didn't want to distract the star," he replied. "You're terrible at lying." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then let me try telling the truth. You were extraordinary." Her eyes softened. "You always say that, because it's always true." They didn't need grand gestures anymore. The small ones, the way he waited for her outside, every event, the way she kept his world grounded with laughter, meant more than any promise could. But the true shift came one evening in late April, when Henry returned home early to find Chloe sitting on the balcony wrapped in a blanket, her gaze fixed on the skyline. The sunset painted her skin in hues of amber and rose. "You're quiet," he said, stepping behind her. "I was just thinking," she murmured, "about how strange it feels to finally be happy. It's almost suspicious." He smiled, sitting beside her. "You don't trust peace." "I trust it," she said softly. "I just don't recognize it yet." He reached for her hand. "Then let's make it familiar." She turned to him, her eyes glimmering with something unspoken. "Henry," she whispered, "what would you have done if we hadn't found our way back?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "I would have spent the rest of my life pretending I didn't look for you in every room." Her breath caught her eyes, filling with quiet tears. "You really have changed." He smiled faintly. "You taught me that love isn't something you earn. It's something you keep choosing." They sat there as the light faded, the city slowly coming alive beneath them. A month later, the world surprised them again, not with chaos this time, but with grace. Chloe had been feeling unwell for days, exhaustion that no amount of coffee or rest could fix. Henry insisted she see a doctor. She rolled her eyes but went anyway. When she returned, he was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, trying and failing to make dinner. "You look pale," he said, dropping the spatula. "What did they say?" She smiled faintly, watching him fuss over the stove. "They said it's nothing serious." "Nothing serious," he repeated. "Well," she said, taking a step closer, "unless you count a baby as serious." The world went still. For a moment, all Henry could do was stare at her eyes, wide, the words not fully landing. "Say that again," he whispered. She laughed softly, tears brimming in her eyes. "You heard me." The realization hit him like sunlight after a storm. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands trembling as they framed her face. "You're sure?" "Completely," He exhaled a sound that was half laugh, half sob. His forehead rested against hers. God, I don't deserve this. She cupped his cheek, her voice tender. Stop saying that. You do. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if the world itself had finally made sense. For the first time, the future didn't look like a negotiation or a headline. It looked like a home. Months later, the penthouse had changed. There were softer colors now, sunlight spilling into corners that once felt cold. A crib waited in the bedroom, tiny clothes folded neatly in drawers. Henry still worked, but differently, leaving the office early, taking meetings from home. His focus shifting from the empire outside to the little world they were building inside. One evening, he found Chloe in the nursery, sitting by the window, her hand resting on her growing belly. She turned when she sensed him watching. Do you ever get scared? She asked quietly. All the time, he said. But then I look at you, and it stops. She smiled. You've gotten good at this whole emotional honesty thing. Don't tell anyone. He murmured, kneeling beside her. He pressed his lips to her stomach. Hey there, little one, he said softly. I hope you inherit your mother's courage and not my stubbornness. Chloe laughed, threading her fingers through his hair. Too late. That's already genetic. He looked up at her, then his eyes softer than she'd ever seen. You saved me, you know. She shook her head. No, you just remembered who you were. The months passed quickly. When their daughter was born, a perfect tiny storm of light, they named her Grace, because that was what she was. Not redemption, not repayment, just grace, the quiet, inexplicable gift that life offered after the war was over. The night they brought her home, the city outside their window shimmered in 1,000 lights. Henry stood by the crib, watching their daughter's small chest rise and fall, the faintest smile on his lips. Chloe came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. She has your eyes, she whispered. She has your strength, he replied. She's ours. The words felt sacred in his mouth. Later, as the night deepened, they sat on the balcony once more. The skyline stretched before them, vast, familiar, and no longer threatening. Chloe leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice soft. Do you ever think about how everything began? How much we had to lose before we learned to love? He smiled faintly. I think about it every day, and I wouldn't change a thing. She looked up at him. Not even the pain, especially the pain he said, because it led me to you. They sat there in silence, the sound of the city blending with the heartbeat of the life they'd built. Inside, their daughter slept. Outside, the world went on, and for once there was nothing left to fight for, only everything left to keep. As dawn began to rise, painting the sky in soft hues of gold and pink, Henry looked at Chloe and realized that peace was not the absence of storms. It was the ability to hold love steady through them. And when Chloe lifted her gaze to his, smiling in that quiet way that had undone him from the beginning, he knew with absolute certainty this was the ending he never dared to believe in, because it wasn't really an ending at all. It was the beginning of forever.